Tim Tales, Part 3. I used to think that my life in the mountains would eventually flatten into routine. That once the drama of leaving the city, buying the cabin, and facing my past had settled, I'd slip into a quiet pattern and stay there, like a rock finally coming to rest at the bottom of a riverbed. But life, I've learned, doesn't really believe in stable phases. It believes in seasons. They repeat, they echo, but they're never exactly the same. You can stand in the same clearing, under the same tree, and if you really pay attention, you'll notice that no two mornings are identical. That's true about landscapes, and it's true about people. By the time this part of my story begins, I'd already left the city, helped my father close the workshop, bought and rebuilt the cabin, lived through a couple of hard winters, seen Ethan come and go like a warm front, met Anna again after many years, and realized that the past no longer ruled me. You'd think that after all that, nothing big would be left, that the rest of my life would be made of small details and slow days. That's not what happened. What happened next was quieter on the surface, but in some ways more important than all the previous chapters. Because this is the part where I stopped just reacting to life and started deliberately shaping it. 1. The year after end of the year, after I met Anna again, was strangely gentle. There were no emotional earthquakes, no sleepless nights replaying what we said, no dramatic sense of loss or longing, just a quiet, steady feeling that something inside me had finally aligned. Seeing her again hadn't reopened the story. It had closed it properly. Before that meeting, part of me had always wondered if there was some unfinished thread between us, some hidden door I'd left half open. After that conversation in the cafe, that door wasn't just closed, it was respectfully locked, labeled, and put where it belonged, in the archive of things that shaped me, but no longer defined me. And for the first time in my adult life, I noticed something strange. When I thought about the future, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just wanted to live it. That shift affected everything. I found myself making small changes around the cabin. Not because I had to, but because I want to make this place feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a real home. I built shelves properly instead of balancing books in stacks on the floor. I replaced a cracked window instead of getting around to it someday. I sanded the front door and re-stained it, watching the grain appear richer under each layer. My father's carving knife, the one he gave me when he sold the workshop, became part of my daily routine. I'd use it to shape handles, smooth edges, carve small lines into wood that nobody but me would ever notice. It felt like I was, in a way, carving myself into this place. There's a big difference between running away to somewhere quiet and consciously choosing that place as your life. That year was when I chose. 2. The fire season, if winter is the season that tests your discipline, summer in these mountains tests your awareness. That summer was dry, drier than usual. The snow melt ended early, and the creeks pulled back into nervous little threads of water between rocks. The air smelled like dust and pine sap, and the forest floor felt brittle underfoot. Everyone in the nearby town talked about fire. At the gas station, in the grocery store, on the community bulletin board. High risk this year, people muttered. One lightning strike in the wrong place, and it's over. I'd seen distant wildfires before, smoke staining the horizon, orange glows on far ridges, but this year felt different. Closer, more personal. I did what everyone was quietly doing. I prepared. I cleared brush around the cabin, moved wood piles farther from the walls, double-checked the travel bag I kept near the door, just in case I had to leave quickly. It's a strange thing, packing a bag under the assumption that everything around you might burn. You start asking yourself odd questions. What do I actually need? What matters enough to carry if I have 10 minutes? What can I lose and still be myself? I didn't have good answers, but I packed anyway. One afternoon, I was out behind the cabin, stacking wood, when I smelled it, not the comforting smell of the fireplace, but the sharp, bitter scent of distant smoke. I looked up. The sky, which had been clear blue that morning, was now smudged with a faint gray smear to the west. I didn't panic, but every sense in my body sharpened. By evening, the news confirmed it. A wildfire had started about 20 miles away. Not an immediate threat to my area, they said, but with the wind patterns and dry conditions, everyone was advised to stay alert. Staying alert is easy to say. It's harder to live inside. The next few days felt like holding my breath. Ash began to fall lightly from the sky, tiny gray flecks landing on the porch railing, on my shirt, on the water in the metal bucket outside. The sun dimmed behind a haze, turning into a pale orange disk. The air grew thick. I could taste it when I inhaled. I kept a radio on almost constantly. Updates, warnings, shifting containment lines. One night, I woke up to a glow on the horizon. That's when I understood, viscerally, that for all my efforts to create a rooted life in this cabin, the land itself didn't belong to me. I was a guest, and the host was unpredictable. 3. The evacuation call came the next morning. Not to my personal phone, a recorded message to the community line. The kind where a calm voice tries to compress urgency into neutral words. Mandatory evacuation in effect for the following zones. My area was on the list. I stood in the middle of the cabin, listening to the message repeat, and realized this was the moment I'd mentally rehearsed but never believed would actually happen. I thought I'd be more emotional, more panicked. But when the real thing happened, I felt oddly focused. I grabbed the bag by the door, checked the few things I decided mattered enough to take. My father's carving knife, a small box of handwritten notes and old photographs, a hard drive with years of writing and documents, a notebook I'd been filling with thoughts, half-formed ideas, and sketches of plans I wasn't ready to admit were plans, a flannel shirt that had somehow become my unofficial armor. I took one last look at the cabin, the chair by the window, the shelf I'd built, the stove, the rough floorboards, the faint grooves in the table where I'd dropped tools or pressed a little too hard while carving. "I'll be back," I said out loud, not sure if I was talking to the building, the land, or myself. Then I locked the door and drove down the mountain. For a different kind of community evacuations bring people together in ways that normal life never does. The community center in town had been turned into a temporary shelter. Cots lined the walls, donated blankets piled in corners, tables covered with coffee urns and paper plates. There was a low buzz of conversation, nervous laughter, kids asking too many questions, older people speaking in shorter sentences than usual. I wasn't used to being around that many people anymore. For a moment, I felt like an outsider, even though I lived just up the road. Like I'd been pretending to belong to the area, but had never really joined it. Then something surprising happened. "Tim," someone called. I turned and saw a man named Frank, who ran the small hardware store in town. I'd only talked to him a few times while buying tools and supplies. He walked over with that tired half-smile people wear when they're worried but don't want to show it. "You made it down?" he said. "Good. Heard they tagged your zone." "Yeah," I said. "Left an hour ago." He nodded, then added, "We might need extra hands later if things get worse." A lot of folks here could use someone steady to talk to. I almost laughed at that. Me? Steady? But maybe from the outside, that's how I looked. A guy who lived alone in the mountains, calm enough to cut wood and fix things. Someone whose entire body language said, "I've had harder days than this." The strange part was, it was partially true. I'd been through emotional storms before. Breakups, life transitions, losing parts of my identity. Those things had torn me up more than any wildfire. So I stayed. I helped set up more cots, carried boxes, passed out bottled water, fixed a jam door that refused to close properly. The whole time, people kept asking each other the same questions. "Do you think the fire will reach the town? Did you manage to bring everything? Any news on containment?" The answers were always variations of "we don't know." Uncertainty can be heavier than fear. but sometimes just having someone to sit near you while you feel uncertain can be enough. I didn't know most of the people there well, but for those hours, that didn't matter. We belonged to the same story. 5. Returning to what remained in the end, the fire didn't take the town. The wind shifted. Rain came in a thin but decisive band. Fire crews drew lines that held. It wasn't a miracle, it was a combination of hard work, luck, and timing. But I was grateful all the same. After 2 days, we were allowed to go back. The drive up was tense. I watched for blackened trees, charred ground, burned-out structures. I saw patches of scorched hillside, a section of forest turned skeletal, the aftermath of flames that had moved fast and hot. When I reached my road and turned toward the cabin, my chest tightened. The trees near my place were dusted with ash. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, like a memory that refused to leave. But when I came around the bend and saw the cabin itself, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was still there, unburned, untouched, waiting. I parked, stepped out, and stood in silence for a long time. Something had changed, not in the building, but in me. I knew, in a way I hadn't fully grasped before, how fragile this life was. A change in wind direction could have erased the physical space I'd built over years. But the sense of home I felt when I stepped back inside, that wasn't fragile. It was something I carried with me now. You can rebuild walls and roofs. You can't easily rebuild the decision to keep showing up for your own life. That day, I decided that if the mountains could take my cabin at any moment, I might as well stop living like my life was a temporary draft. I needed to commit, not just to the place, but to the person I was becoming. 6. The idea I kept ignoring for months. There had been an idea nagging at the back of my mind. I kept pushing it away because it felt silly in a way, or self-indulgent. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. The idea was simple. Maybe I should start telling my story out loud. Not just in my own head, not just on paper, but in a way someone else could hear. I'd already been filling notebooks for years, writing down memories, reflections, descriptions of the forest, conversations with Ethan, visits with my father. Some pages were half legible, written by lantern light when I was too tired to care about neatness. Others were careful, deliberate, almost like letters to some future version of myself. But after the fire season, after seeing the community gather and realizing we're all just trying to make sense of our own stories, something shifted. I started to wonder if my life in this cabin, my mistakes, my slow learning curves, might mean something to someone else someday. I didn't think of it as content or a channel or anything modern like that. That vocabulary felt too shiny for the reality of wood smoke and creaking floorboards. To me, it felt more like this. I've been quiet for a long time. Maybe it was time to speak. The problem was, I didn't know where to begin. 7. Ethan's visit. Part 2 of the universe has a strange sense of timing. Right around the time I was wrestling with this idea, Ethan called. His voice sounded different, thinner, frayed around the edges. He'd always had this lively, energetic way of talking, like his thoughts were sprinting ahead and his words were trying to catch up. This time he seemed tired. "Can I come out for a bit?" he asked. "Like, more than a weekend. I kind of need a reset." "Of course," I said. "How long are you thinking?" He hesitated. "I don't know. A couple of weeks? Maybe more if I don't drive you crazy." "You've never driven me crazy," I said. "Get here. We'll figure everything else out." When he arrived, he looked like someone who'd been living inside fluorescent lighting for too long. Pale, a little hunched, eyes with dark circles under them. But he still tried to joke. "Your place looks even more like an emotionally stable lumberjack lives here," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Good," I replied. "You look like a guy who needs one." We didn't dive straight into deep conversations. That's not our style. We cooked simple meals, walked short trails, fixed small things around the cabin. He slept more than I'd ever seen him sleep. On the 4th day, we sat outside, watching the late afternoon light drift between the trees. He finally spoke. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, he said quietly. I didn't say anything at first. I just waited. He continued, I followed this path for years. Career, promotions, projects, this whole story of success. And I'm good at it, you know. I can't even pretend I'm not. But lately I wake up and think, if I stop doing this, what's left? Who am I? And I don't have an answer. And that scares me. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. Maybe, I said slowly, you don't need to know who you are in a sentence right now. Maybe it's enough to notice you're not okay with how things are, and take that seriously. He sighed. You always make it sound simpler than it feels. I don't think it's simple, I said. I just think we make it more complicated when we try to turn it into a perfect plan. He looked at me for a long moment. Is that what you did? When you came out here? I thought about that. No, I said. At first, I came out here to run away. To get quiet because I felt like I couldn't breathe in my old life. The difference now is, I'm not running away anymore. I'm choosing this. And you're okay? He asked. I considered the question. Really considered it. I'm not done, I replied. But I'm okay being unfinished. That's new for me. He rubbed his face with both hands. I want that. Then stay, I said. Stay long enough to hear yourself again. He did. 8. Teaching myself how to speak again, having Ethan around for a while, shifted my routine in a good way. We split chores, cooked together, traded stories from our separate worlds. He taught me about the strange, fast-paced chaos of his job. I showed him how to sharpen an axe, how to read the sky for weather, how to listen to the forest at night, and tell the difference between harmless rustling and something you should pay attention to. One evening, we were sitting by the wood stove, and I caught myself telling him, in detail, a story about my first winter in the cabin. I described the night. The temperature dropped so suddenly that the windows frosted over in patterns I'd never seen before. How I'd misjudged my wood supply and had to ration it carefully. How I sat by the fire, realizing I'd never felt so vulnerable and so alive at the same time. When I finished, Ethan was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, you're good at this. At what? I asked. At telling it, he replied. You don't just describe events. You make me feel what it was like. I shrugged, uncomfortable. I'm just talking. Exactly, he said. That's what people forget how to do. Then he added, almost casually, you should record this stuff sometime. The comment landed in the exact spot where that ignored idea had been hovering for months. I've thought about it, I admitted. Of course you have, he said. You've got that look on your face like someone who's been arguing with himself in silence. I laughed. It was accurate. Who would even listen? I said. He lifted an eyebrow. You think you're the only one trying to figure out who they are outside of old stories and expectations? Trust me, man, if you put this out there, someone will find it right when they need it. I didn't respond right away, but inside something clicked. The idea didn't feel stupid anymore. It felt possible. 9. The first recording after Ethan went to sleep that night, I stayed up. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional pop from the stove and the soft hum of wind outside. I sat at the table with my notebook open, a small lantern casting warm light over the page. I didn't write. I just stared at the blank space. Then I got up, went to the small shelf near my bed, and pulled out a device I'd bought months ago and never really used, a simple recorder. I told myself I'd use it for notes on trails, observations about weather, practical things. But that hadn't happened. Now, I held in my hand and felt the weight differently. I sat down again, clicked it on, and just breathed for a moment. Then, without planning it, I started talking. My name is Tim, I said, my own voice sounding strange and too close in my ears. I live in a small cabin in the mountains of Colorado. I didn't always live here. I used to live in a city, surrounded by noise, convinced that the more I did, the more I mattered. This is the story of how that changed. I talked for nearly an hour. Not perfectly, not smoothly. I stumbled over phrases, circled back, repeated myself. But I kept going. I talked about my childhood, about my father's workshop, about college and meeting Ethan, about Anna, about the first time I stepped into this cabin and realized how much work it needed and how much I needed that work. When I finally stopped, my throat was dry. I listened back to a few minutes of the recording and winced. I didn't sound like the person I heard in my head. I sounded softer, more hesitant, but also more honest than I'd expected. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and something in me relaxed. I didn't decide that night to share it with anyone. Not yet, but I knew this was a beginning. I found a new way to hear myself. 10. Search and rescue around the same time that I started recording my stories. Something else happened that pulled me further into the world beyond my own doorstep. I was in town dropping off supplies when I saw a notice on the bulletin board of the general store. Volunteers needed. Local search and rescue team. There was a phone number, a list of basic requirements, and a note that said, must be reasonably fit, able to stay calm under pressure, and willing to train. I read it twice. I'd heard of the team, of course. In the mountains, hikers get lost. People underestimate weather, distance, their own limits. Every year, there's stories, some with good endings, some with quiet, painful ones nobody talks about too loudly. I'm not someone who goes looking for danger. I like my routines, my small circle of known variables. But as I stood there, looking at that paper, I felt a pull. Maybe it was because the fire season had reminded me how fragile and interconnected we all are out here. Maybe it was because I'd spent so long focusing inward that I was ready to turn some of that attention outward. Whatever the reason, I took out my phone and called the number. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a parking lot at the edge of town with a dozen other people, listening to the team leader explain the basics: navigation, communication, safety, chain of command. His name was Marco. He'd been doing this for years and had that calm, straightforward presence you automatically trust. We're not heroes, he said. We're problem solvers. Our job is to go into messy situations, stay clear-headed, and bring people back safely if we can. And if we can't, our job is still to bring them back. The training was harder than I expected. Not just physically, though there were long hikes, heavy packs, drills in rough terrain, but mentally. Learning how to stay focused when your own adrenaline wants to sprint in 3 different directions. Learning how to balance urgency with caution. But there was something deeply grounding about it. Out there, on those practice missions, my past didn't matter. My old mistakes didn't matter. My unformed plans for the future didn't matter. All that mattered was the person who needed help and the team around me. I hadn't realized how much I missed being part of something larger than myself. 11. The first real call I went on wasn't dramatic enough to make the news, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life. A teenage boy had gone missing on a trail not far from my area. He'd been out with his family, got upset about something, and walked ahead. They lost sight of him around a bend. He never came back to the car. By the time a team was called in, it was late afternoon. Clouds were moving in, temperature dropping. We split into groups, fanning out along different paths. I was paired with a woman named Carla who'd been on the team longer than I had. She moved with the kind of efficient calm that only comes from experience. We called his name. We followed footprints where we could. We checked spots where someone might try to find a shortcut back to the trail. Hours passed. I didn't feel fear so much as a tightness in my chest, a kind of urgent compassion. I kept imagining his parents, waiting, calculating all the things they wished they'd done differently that day. Just before dusk, Carla stopped, lifted a hand, and tilted her head. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I held my breath. At first, all I heard was wind in the branches. Then faintly, I caught it, a small, thin sound. Crying. We followed it and found him sitting on a rock, arms wrapped around his knees, shivering. He wasn't injured, just cold, scared, and ashamed. When he saw us, he tried to wipe his face quickly, like he could erase the evidence of his fear. "It's okay," I said, kneeling down nearby, making sure not to crowd him. "You're not in trouble. We're just here to take you back." He nodded. eyes red, teeth chattering. We put a jacket around him, gave him water, and slowly walked him back toward the trailhead. He didn't say much, but every few minutes he'd glance at us like he couldn't believe we were really there. When we finally reached the edge of the parking lot, I saw his mother break into a run. She pulled him into a hug so fast she nearly knocked him over. I stepped back, letting the moment belong to them. But as I watched, something shifted inside me. All the years I'd spent trying to figure out who I was and what my life meant, those questions weren't gone. But for the first time, they didn't feel like the main story. This felt like the main story, being there when it mattered for someone who needed it. I didn't say anything poetic to myself. No big internal monologue. I just quietly decided that this kind of work would be part of my life from then on. 12. A conversation with my father around the time I grew more involved with search and rescue. My father called and surprised me with a sentence I never thought I'd hear from him. "I've been thinking about visiting your place," he said. I'd invited him before, casually, but he'd always brushed it off. Too far, too busy, too many things to take care of. Hearing him bring it up on his own made me sit up straighter. "I like that," I said. "Come whenever you're ready. I'll pick you up from town." A week later, I was standing in front of the bus stop, watching him step down from the worn steps, carrying a small duffel bag and wearing the same old jacket he'd had for years. He looked smaller somehow. Not weaker, just older. Time had carved new lines into his face, like the grain in the wood we used to sand together. The drive up was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. We talked about practical things, the road, the weather, how the town had changed. He didn't say anything poetic about the mountains, but I caught him looking out the window a lot longer than usual. When we reached the cabin, he stood in front of it for a long moment. "You did all this?" he finally asked. "Most of it," I said. "The structure was here. I just made it livable." He nodded, running his hand along the railing I'd built. Inside, he inspected everything in that silent, methodical way he had, checking joints, corners, how smoothly doors opened and closed. It wasn't judgmental. It was, in his own language, a kind of respect. "You learned something after all," he said eventually. Coming from him, that was high praise. That evening, we ate a simple meal and sat in front of the stove. The light flickered across his face, making him look both older and somehow like the man I remembered from my childhood. "I heard about those fires you had up here," he said. "You all right?" "Yeah," I replied. "Had to evacuate for a couple of days. But it held." He nodded slowly. "Could have lost it all." "Yeah," I said again. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I used to be angry when you left," he admitted. "The city first, and then this. Felt like you were walking away from everything I tried to give you. The workshop, the skills, the life I understood." I listened, not interrupting. This wasn't something he would say lightly. "But I see this place now," he continued, "and I think maybe you didn't walk away. Maybe you took what I gave you and just used it somewhere I don't fully understand." I swallowed. It felt like something in my chest loosened. "I did," I said quietly. "I couldn't stay there, but I didn't throw it away. The things you taught me, they're in everything I've built here." He nodded, eyes on the fire. "Well," he said, "that's all I ever really wanted. For you to build something that would hold you." We didn't hug. That wasn't our style. But the distance between us shrank in a way I could feel. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe my father and I weren't on opposite sides of a choice. Maybe we were just standing at different points along the same piece of wood, each working a separate edge. 13. Turning the mic outward after he left, I went back to my recordings with renewed focus. I started organizing them, labeling sessions, breaking my story into parts. Childhood, the workshop, college and Ethan, Anna, the cabin, the fire season, search and rescue, my father's visit, but something still felt unfinished. Telling my story into a recorder helped me understand myself better. That alone would have been enough. But Ethan's words kept echoing in my mind. If you put this out there, someone will find it right when they need it. I thought about the boy we'd found in the forest, alone and scared. How much it had meant for there to be a voice calling his name in the dark. Maybe I thought there are people out there who feel like that, lost, ashamed of being lost, convinced nobody will come looking. Maybe a voice in their headphones telling a story about not having life figured out. Could be a kind of search and rescue too. Not dramatic, not life-saving in the obvious way, but quietly important. So one day, I made a decision that would have terrified the younger version of me. I decided to share the stories. Not with a big announcement, not with marketing or a grand plan, just a simple channel, a place where I could put them one by one and let them exist in the world instead of only in my notebooks. I didn't chase trends or try to sound like anyone else. I just spoke like I would to a friend sitting across from me at the table. My name is Tim, I said in the first episode. I live alone in a small cabin in the mountains. But I haven't always lived alone, and I haven't always been okay with who I am. This is the story of how I got here, and what I'm still figuring out. I uploaded it with no expectations. Then I went outside, listened to the wind in the trees, and reminded myself that whether 10 people or 10,000 listened, it didn't change what mattered most. I was finally living my life with the door open, not barricaded. 14. The quiet impact days went by. Then weeks. I continued recording new parts of the story, talking about the things that had shaped me, the mistakes I'd made, the lessons I hadn't wanted but clearly needed. Then, slowly, something unexpected happened. Messages started to appear. Not hundreds, just a few at first, but each one felt real. People wrote things like, I listened to this while walking alone, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the only one who didn't have everything figured out. Or, I've been thinking about changing my life, but I've been scared too. Hearing how you did it, not perfectly, but honestly, helped me. Or, I don't live in the mountains. I live in a noisy city. But your stories make me feel like there's a quieter part of myself I've been ignoring. I read each message carefully, sometimes twice. Not because I needed validation, but because it was humbling to realize something. The small, slow life I'd built, so different from what I'd once imagined for myself, wasn't just quietly meaningful to me. It meant something to others too. I wasn't a famous creator, or a polished speaker, or a model of success. I was just a man living honestly. And apparently, that was enough. 15. Where I am now, so where does that leave me? I'm still in a cabin. The mountains are still outside my window. The wood stove still crackles. The floor still creaks in familiar places. I still volunteer with search and rescue. Still talk to Ethan. Still check in with my father. Still think of Anna sometimes, not with sadness or longing, but with a kind of quiet respect for the role she played in my life. But something inside me has changed. I no longer think of my life as something I'm trying to fix or justify. I no longer measure myself against paths I didn't take. I no longer believe that being unsure of the future means I'm failing. Instead, I've started to see my life as an ongoing conversation between who I was and who I'm becoming, between solitude and community, between the part of me that wants to retreat and the part of me that wants to reach out. Some days I still feel lost. Some days I still feel small. Some days I still doubt. But even on those days, I know this. I've built something that holds me. I made peace with my past. I'm doing work that matters to others and to me. And I'm telling the truth about it out loud. If you're hearing this, if my voice has somehow made its way into your day, then you're part of this chapter too. You don't know me. I don't know you. But we're both here in this moment, sharing a bit of time and attention. And if there's one thing my life has taught me so far, it's this. Sometimes the smallest shared moments can change the direction of an entire story. My name is Tim. I live in a small cabin in the mountains of Colorado. I don't have everything figured out, but I'm finally okay with that. And for now, that's enough.